Police have arrested a man suspected to be involved in the murder, rape and kidnapping of 7 women in Limpopo. He allegedly lured the women with promises of employment in Polokwane. Now, it is believed a cell phone which belonged to a woman who went missing in Limpopo last month led to the arrest. The suspect faces multiple charges and is due to appear at the Seshego Magistrate Court tomorrow.
Well, the suspect was initially arrested for possession of a suspected stolen cell phone. Then the investigations commenced immediately thereafter. And after the information pointed to a possible serial killer or the person who might be responsible for the women that were missing in the Capricorn district, the Provincial Commissioner of this province, Lieutenant General Timbi Khadebe, ordered for the establishment of an investigating team led by a senior officer to probe all these cases of missing persons in the Capricorn district. Now, immediately thereafter, the police managed to recover 7 bodies that were found dumped at different locations under Seshego, Polokwane and Westernburg policing areas. Now, the suspect, aged 84, is facing charges of murder, rape, defeating the ends of justice and robbery. He is expected to appear in the Seshego Magistrate Court tomorrow on Monday.
Let's get more reaction. The Limpopo MEC for Social Development in Kakareng Rahwale says the alleged killer should not be granted bail.
As the Department of Social Development in Limpopo, we really welcome the breakthrough that has been made by the police, and we hope that their investigations will reveal more information around this particular act of violence meted out against women and children. And as the department, we really want the court not to grant this suspect bail, looking at the seriousness of the crimes that is facing. And gender-based violence is one of the social ills that we are experiencing in the province. And when the justice system is coming, also coming into the whole picture, this gives a bit of hope to our people. This gives hope to government, because we are determined to ensure that people whom we describe as vulnerable are protected at all material times.
Meanwhile, in Soweto, residents are in shock after human body parts were discovered in a fridge. This is after a young woman found the human remains while visiting her partner in Protea Glen on Saturday. A 24-year-old suspect has since been arrested and is currently in custody at a Gauteng hospital. He also tried to commit suicide before he was detained. Police say the remains have been sent to the Forensic Science Laboratory lab for identification. Meanwhile, Gauteng Police Commissioner Elias Mawela says the man will appear in court next week, depending on his health. Now, to speak more about the cases, we are joined by Professor Gerard Labuchagne, a forensic psychologist. Now, Professor, when dealing with such cases or cases of this nature, police oftentimes rely on tip-offs to get more information. Firstly, take us through the investigation process. What happens in the initial stages?
Well, obviously, you've got 2 quite separate different types of murder. We've got the ones obviously in Limpopo, which are pretty much clarified that they are a serial. I do know that already prior to this guy being arrested, members of my old unit, the investigative psychology section, actually were looking into one of the murders because it had the hallmarks of a serial murder crime scene. A victim being lured away with the offer of employment, found out in the open felt, and naked and murdered. So already they were kind of working on that case, and it just seems almost by providence that following up on other information, police arrested the person with a cell phone, and then he confessed to a bunch of murders. That's how the sort of 2 came together. So I think that's great. You know, you've got the right types of people involved. We know that the detective head for Limpopo province is Brigadier James Espak himself, a very experienced serial murder investigator, is overseeing the team. So I think they'll do all the necessary steps. The important things now will be identify the decomposed remains of the other ladies. Obviously, we want to inform their families, and then just tie in those links to make sure that we can link this suspect to those cases. I believe he's pointed out 4 crime scenes to the police, which obviously is fantastic evidence in its own right, if it's done properly. I mean, that's enough to get a conviction if the pointing out process is done correctly. So at that point, for that case, your identification of the bodies is important. Obviously, looking for more bodies. You know, we can never assume that the 7 that we know about are the only ones. So you'd have to get K9 units out to search the area, matching up missing persons with bodies. And that's, of course, difficult because many people go missing, and they go missing in different parts of the country, not necessarily where their bodies are found.
Right.
So that's the key elements for that particular case. With regards to the case in Soweto, I mean, obviously, at this point, we can't even say this guy murdered her. Technically, legally, they wouldn't yet be able to charge him with murder. They'd be able to charge him with possession of human body parts. Now, it's more likely than not he is responsible for the death of this person. In that particular case, of course, the identification of the young lady, if we assume it's a lady at this point in time, forensically, you want to link, is this actually all from the same body? We can assume it is, but in court, you have to prove that these actually all come from the same human being. So DNA testing, I know the police have the Victim Identification Center. They would step in and help identify this particular victim. Fingerprints are there, so that'll be the first avenue to identify this person. But there are unique markings, such as tattoos, apparently, on the victim's arms, which, again, would be help us to identify who this individual is, and then start to trace that person's steps and bring the suspect who's been arrested in connection with this lady's disappearance and murder.
Which brings me to my next point around just the importance of the gathering of physical evidence in matters such as this one. In South African courts, it's the onus of the state to prove its case beyond reasonable doubt. And oftentimes there's a lot of pressure on the state as well as the investigating officers to ensure that their case is watertight. Speak to us about the importance of the physical evidence that's gathered.
Yeah, absolutely. In any case, let's just take definitely murder investigations. Your crime scene is absolutely essential to be done 100% correctly. And what I often see is when people look at the cases open and shut, well, we've found these body parts in this guy's fridge, we arrested him, they always sometimes tend to sit back and think, well, you know, this is done and dusted. And unfortunately, these cases can take quite a turn as things go on. As I said, did this person murder this individual, or are they just in possession of body parts they could have gotten from another source? And also, is this person going to claim some kind of mental health issues? And all of those, again, come back to that initial crime scene. Did we do everything? Did we just focus on that fridge and the body parts, or did we make sure we searched the whole house, canvassed the neighbors, etc., etc.? So you really have to start. If you don't do that crime scene in initial stages correctly, it's very often difficult to fix that later. So again, we want your top-notch investigators on this case from the start. You know, we shut down our specialized units many years ago that probably would have taken over such a case. So very often it's left at a station level, and you have 2 or 3 detectives who are overwhelmed with unnatural deaths, from car accidents to suicides to murders. And unfortunately, you often leave it in the hands of one lone detective who's overburdened with cases, doesn't always know of all the forensic resources available to them, and that can be a huge problem. You know, do they call out the forensic pathologist to the actual crime scene, which often the police surprisingly don't. We find in about 2% of murder cases the police even go to the autopsy. So a lot of things that you can't fix later that really need to be done up front, and if you've got a top-notch investigator, you know, then things should go well.
Let's speak about establishing the identity of suspects. Oftentimes, one imagines that, especially in the mind of a serial killer, that they would do their best to ensure that their scent is not picked up by the police, to ensure that they cover all their tracks. But with the Limpopo case, here you find a suspect who was actually willing to point out where he had buried some of his victims.
You know, that's actually not that surprising. We've had that in other cases where a suspect is picked up for something else. And in the process of being interviewed for that same sort of minor crime, talks about a whole bunch of other things. And is it a case they want to be caught? Is it a case they're bragging about what they've done? I don't know. Other times when we arrested serial murderers through our investigation process, you know, again, you know, within an hour or two, they're telling us about what they've done. And it really is, if you approach that individual in the correct manner, and often serial murderers, the first time they can talk about what they've done is very often with that investigating officer that's arrested them. So you really want people to understand the mind of the serial murderer. There are very good detectives and SAPs that have been trained by my old unit to investigate these cases. We want those people involved as soon as possible. And that's, again, we've never lost a serial murder trial in court that we've gone to court with. So SAPS has a fantastic reputation for convictions of serial murderers. And probably about 75% of murder series are solved. So again, SAPS, because the unfortunate history of us having probably over 250 serial murders in our history, has built up a lot of expertise in this regard.
We also got the opportunity to speak to residents of Protea Glen in Soweto, where that grisly finding was made of body parts that were discovered in a fridge. But we spoke to residents who basically, of course, reacted with a lot of shock. But at times when you have matters like this, communities often feel the need to take matters into their own hands and help find or track the suspect down. What kind of risks does that pose?
You know, obviously, I think it's understandable. You know, I think there have been ratings of government services, and SAPS unfortunately is not particularly highly rated by the public in terms of service delivery. So it's understandable that communities want to take the law into their own hands. You get vigilantism. We've had people killing potential suspects. It turns out not to be the suspect. So I think it's not acceptable, of course, but it's understandable when people don't feel the police are capable of doing their job. Of course, information from the public is always important. You know, something that somebody might have seen a person driving past a house or arriving or leaving a particular scene. There could be that one piece of information that helps solve a case. But taking the law into their own hands is never, obviously, an ideal thing. Even finding evidence and picking it up and bringing it to the police with the best of intentions, of course, potentially contaminates the evidence that could have been used. So one really would, would prefer that if there's information available to bring that to the police's attention and not sort of try and be policemen yourselves. Also interesting is the amount of pressure that's also placed on the police to make breakthroughs in these kind of cases, where oftentimes the community would also be up in arms and call for the police to act. Does this not then compromise a lot of cases in a sense that maybe the wrong suspect might be caught in some instances? Well, in my time when I was in the police, I worked on over 110 murder series. I was the task team leader of the Quarry murder series. So I kind of know exactly that the pressures, if you don't catch this person soon enough, someone else is going to die. So you really feel that pressure not only to solve what's happened, but what's going to happen. And I'd like to say that I've always experienced that there's been an evidence-based investigation. It doesn't help you grab the wrong person because the murders will continue. So I've always found that, yes, you might come across likely suspects in the process of your investigation that your investigation has led you to, and you quickly try and exclude them through forensic evidence such as DNA, interviewing, etc., etc. And there might be one or two people that you pick up early in the initial phases. You might not necessarily arrest them, but usually we find that it's the first or second person in a murder series investigation that we come across is very often the suspect. And very quickly, are you encouraged by the quick turnaround time when it comes to these two cases that we're discussing here? I mean, arrests have been made and suspects are due in court. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it just sounds like the Limpopo one. There were really a lot of things happening even before this guy was arrested with the cell phone, which kind of were fortuitous. And like I said, you've got a great team in Limpopo. Like I said, the detective head in Limpopo province has been incredibly experienced investigating himself. In the Soweto case, obviously, that came out as soon as the lady found it. So you always want to find your crime scene as soon as possible. Decomposed bodies make it very difficult forensically, not only to identify them, but to link a suspect to a crime. Prof, what an insightful chat. That's Professor Gerard Labuchagne speaking to us there about his experience in as far as criminal investigations of this nature. I mean, we saw that a suspected serial killer out in Limpopo, he's due to appear in court in Seshego tomorrow, as well as a breakthrough being made after the grisly discovery out in Soweto in Protea Glen, where body parts were discovered in a fridge.